Hello, anyone who is watching this. Welcome to the chat that we are having today. Is self-trust possible? Rach, before we get started, do you want to take a time to introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. Thanks, Ed. Um, it's one of those things, isn't it, when you introduce yourself where you're like, who am I? Where am I? What does it all mean? But hello, yeah. So I am Rachel, one half of this Ed Rach duo doing the session today. And I am a coach and learning facilitator and YouTube person, primarily working with people that are late diagnosed with ADHD. So people that are trying to make sense of what that means and kind of want to put that inside fire of creative energy somewhere that's been burning under the surface, but they hadn't realized how they could get it out. Yeah, so I primarily do that through one-to-one coaching, group program that I'm starting next month, and kind of YouTube content and stuff. Ed,
Nice.
what about you?
What about me? Same thing. Go completely blank every time I get asked this. I am Ed, the other half of this Ed Rach duo. And I am also a coach. I'm focusing a lot more now on kind of sex and relationship coaching and things. I do that through again one-to-one work and things like that. I also run the big spoon sessions in the morning and just kind of try and make people feel good about themselves, their relationships, build confidence, and that kind of stuff. I have spent a lot of time, I think, quite similarly to you, Rach, doing like a lot of work with neurodivergent people and things like that as well. Um, just kind of a good old mix of things, basically. Um, so we've introduced ourselves. I guess the first place to start, Rach, is to ask you what self-trust means to you, because we're asking this question of like, is it possible? But I think it's
Mhm.
useful to know what we even mean by that. So what does self-trust mean to you?
I think, and we were just joking about this beforehand, weren't we? That like, I don't know what my answer is to this. I'm just going to see what
Mm,
comes out of me, which is part of self trust, I guess. But I think like a lot of the time we talk about self-confidence and self-esteem, but I
mm,
genuinely believe that you can't really have those things if you don't trust yourself. And so a lot of, well, my own personal experience and a lot of people that I work with, their sense of confidence and self-esteem is so fractured because they don't feel like they can trust themselves on a day-to-day level to kind of do the things that they say they're going to do or that they want and
mm,
need to do. And then I think on a bigger level, self-trust around like decision making and being able to make life choices and decisions that I guess you trust or that you know that are the right things for you. So I think there's so much to it, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But for me, it's just this idea of like feeling like you can make the right decisions for yourself, and also knowing that you're going to do the things that you want and say you're going to do, which is a complex topic in the neurodivergent space. Yeah.
mm. Definitely. Yeah, I love that though. I think just having that confidence in yourself to kind of make the decisions that you need to make and just know that it will happen and thing. I know that's something we've spoken about kind of just mm, personally and privately outside of things is that idea of trusting yourself.
Hmm.
To like just know that the things that need to happen will happen and stuff. So yeah, I
Yeah.
really love that answer. I love that.
What
Mm.
what's your what's your version of self trust?
What is my version of self-trust? I think self-trust to me is I mean, obviously I agree with everything that you've just said. I think it's having that confidence to make those decisions and things. But I also think for me there's an element of it of kind of like trusting your character as well. So like knowing that the decisions you make are kind of right for you and maybe other people and knowing that you're doing things for the right reasons. I think that's quite a big part of self-trust as well. So there's the side of it that's like, I trust that I can do this thing, or I can trust that I will, you know, get this done or make the right decision. But I think that for me personally, it's like, do I trust that I am good in whatever way that means to me? Like, am I a good person? Are the decisions that I make done with kind of goodness? I can't
Mm,
think of a better word. But do you know what I mean? Like having that trust in being like, yeah, okay, I think I'm doing things for the right reason. And I think I trust myself to make decisions and to get things done and those kind of things with that kind of, overarching theme of like for goodness at the center of that almost.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
That's
again, I know that
interesting.
this is like, yeah, go on.
No, I just think that's interesting because I hadn't actually thought about that aspect of it, like the character, the
Mm,
core. Like my intentions are good, so even if people misperceive those intentions, or if the outcome isn't what I intended it to be, then I trust that like the intention was right. And that's interesting because I would say that like probably the beginning, maybe 5-6 years ago, of me understanding my own like of like learning to trust myself and my decisions and things, I had this like model of myself as someone that was like totally just, I don't want to say off the wall, but just like unpredictable, like couldn't make the right decisions, couldn't trust the things that I was doing because I didn't know what I was going to do next. But then when I actually like interrogated that a little bit, it was on like a really small scale. It wasn't like I was doing anything absolutely like wild or whack. It was just that like it wasn't this perfect straightforward line that I thought it should be. And so to your point, it's like kind of almost like looking under the hood and investigating yourself and realizing that there are these core elements that like make you who you are. And sometimes they might feel like, oh my goodness, I can't trust myself because I'm just so all over the place. But actually, when you put it into perspective, it's really not that extreme often.
No, and I think it's really interesting on the point of the kind of that experience as someone who's neurodivergent. I think we're told so many times that we are impulsive and we're risk taking and we're reckless and we're too much and we're all of these things. And it's really hard to fight against that, especially when we think we're kind of like confirming those things by like, oh, I don't know, maybe I spent £50 on a hat or something like that, which in the grand scheme of things isn't a massive thing to do, right? Like that's kind of fine, but it starts to then add into the kind of the confirmation bias to be like, see, look how impulsive I am, and that starts to like degrade your trust, right, in
Mm,
yourself, is being like, I can't even trust myself, I bought a £50 hat or whatever it is. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's particularly challenging for neurodivergent people who have been told that they can't trust themselves or that other people can't trust them or whatever, for whatever reasons. So yeah, I really like that. And I think having some of that kind of, what am I trying to say? I've lost my point. Of course I have. I think with the trust though, is kind of like, oh, that was it. I think with this, we've been told so many times as neurodivergent people that we can't be trusted, we're impulsive, we're all of these things. But I think a massive, massive part of self-trust for me is knowing that we are the experts on ourselves. So
mm,
like with self-trust, I know a lot of people that like my clients and things that have struggled with this, they will speak to other people to ask for their opinion, their advice, their whatever, and will trust that over what they know. Even if someone's told them to do something that in their gut they think that doesn't feel right, that's not going to work, they'll still pick that because they've learned to trust other people over themselves. I
mm,
think that's a really, really tricky place to be in there. I think that is kind of one of the fundamental things for me, that in this question of like, is self trust possible? Is like, is self trust possible in the face of all of these things that tell you that it's not? And it's like, how do we move away from that? Um, what I mean, in your opinion, like, what is one way to start to move away from that? Like, what have you done in your kind of journey of like learning self-trust and things to pull away from that idea that we can't be trusted, to now
mm.
starting to like trust yourself a little bit more?
I think also related to what you've just said actually is you can't trust yourself if you're never given the opportunity to trust yourself. And so if you're always externally validating, or if you're always being driven by somebody else's choices, it you end up feeling like, oh well, I can't trust myself, but you don't know what you're capable of because you've not taken the risk. And so I think there's like almost a first step which can be really uncomfortable because it does pose the threat of failure, or feeling like you might be judged or whatever it is. But it's just like, let yourself, because how do you like prove to yourself that you can be trusted if you never give yourself the
Mm.
opportunity? And I think that's why sometimes a lot of people, and this was my experience, of like you're forced into one of my major developments of self-trust, if you will, was having to make a decision about my relationship. And when you're forced into a situation where you have to make a high stakes decision and it's painful and difficult and you do it and then you deal with the consequences, um it was like a major point of development for me because I never had the chance before that. So I think it's in some ways kind of nice if you're forced in that direction. But if not, you've got to create little things for yourself that help you to take a risk.
Definitely. It's fascinating actually, you've just said that about being given the opportunity to. And even though you're talking about kind of an adult relationship and very high stakes and things, it's reminded me of whenever I'm kind of like around kids or anything. So my nieces and nephews, for example, they were literally with me last week, and actually this has reminded me of that. We were at the beach and they wanted to climb up some high rocks, and their parents were like, "No, no, 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 they're not no, 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 they're not doing it." And actually, in that moment, there was an opportunity there to kind of go, "Yeah, you can't do it. You can't be trusted to climb those rocks," or to give them the skills, the tools, the opportunity to go, "Well, see if you can trust yourself. Like, climb. We'll make it safe. We'll do it in a good way. But you need to be given that opportunity to kind of see if you can trust yourself to climb up here,
Mm.
or to ask for support when you need it, or to do things in a safe way." And then they did do it, and they were fine. And I think that then hopefully has taught them, because they're like 5 and 7, has taught them that they can trust themselves. Maybe they can ask for some support, advice, that kind of things of other people, but ultimately they're in charge. And it's really
Mhm.
interesting that them at like 5 and 7 climbing a rock phase, it's kind of the same thing as you in an adult relationship choosing what to do there. Like, being given that opportunity to be like, with all the stakes in mind, do you trust yourself? And like that's the moment where it kind of comes out. So that's, yeah, that's really interesting actually, the kind of the parallels there almost.
Yeah. And George just
Another
commented
question.
there,
Oh yeah.
open the door of opportunity to play in the fields of self-trust, right? And that
Oh,
can
I love
be,
that. She's so poetic.
isn't she? I love the visual. But it's funny, I'm thinking like, "Oh, I've just had a thought off of your thought," but that's how conversations work.
That
Which
is.
is related to the children thing. You've just reminded me that I have this little analogy in my head that it just seems like so poignant, which is I remember going to Centre Parks when I was about 8 or 9 years old and like throwing myself down the water slide. And I've always loved that kind of
Mm,
stuff as a kid. And I just enjoyed it and would throw myself down. And I went back for my dad's 60th when I would have been 28. And I went down the water slide and it was so uncomfortable because I was bracing myself the entire way. Because adulthood has
mm,
taught me that one must control and protect. But then all you do is like awkwardly bash up against the sides. And
mhm,
so the next time that I came down, I was like, we're just going to let go. And I know me and you have talked about this. Like, there's something
mhm,
about having the need to let go of control so you can almost like flow a bit more freely and ultimately trust that you'll just do what needs to be done to get to the bottom safely. So I
mhm.
think the letting go of control is quite a big piece of it as well.
Definitely, yeah. That kind of links actually to what I was going to ask you just before we saw George's comment, which was, in situations where you have needed to kind of like employ self-trust and you've needed to make the decision to trust yourself, to let go, to that kind of thing. Do you have any like key things you look out for to be like, okay, I know I'm trusting myself here? Like, do you have any key like behaviors or thoughts or anything like that that tell you that's what's happening?
Ooh. Hmm. Trying to think because I do think like I think it takes a bit of time, but that like listening to your gut and it can sound so wishy-washy, right? Like just listen to your intuition. But I think a lot of us, if we're honest with ourselves, will have a gut reaction. Doesn't mean you have to trust it straight away, but it's telling you something that, you know, you need to hear. Um the first thing that popped into my head though was that like I read Mark Manson's Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck years ago,
Mm,
and there was a question in there that I really liked, which is what are you willing to suffer for? Because it there was something about that that's like if you know the answer to that question, you can kind of trust that like you're making the right choice for you because you're accepting that there might be an unhappy consequence to it, but you want it or believe in it
mm,
enough to take the risk. So I think little questions like
mm.
that, which is why coaching is so great. Um,
True.
yeah, can be helpful. Do you have a go-to?
Mm. Yeah, I asked you that question and then thought, God, I'd hate to be asked that one. I think, if so, I guess there's a couple of things, because if I, there's a few things here, as there always is when I'm asked a question. The gut feeling initially, you said that you get that gut feeling, you don't necessarily have to listen to it, but it's something to kind of like take note of almost. And I think one thing that I've learned with more experience, especially post diagnosis, is looking at like that gut feeling, even if you ignore it and go completely away from it kind of always finds a way to of like coming back to that gut feeling again. It might look different. You might have made other like things and the situation might be slightly different. But that gut feeling is really like it's a powerful thing to listen to. And I think, yeah, even if you kind of come away from that and other things have happened and the situation has changed, the gut feeling is kind of still the thing that I end up coming back to. So I think one part of it is like listening to that gut feeling from the get-go and kind of like trying with the ADHD brain to have a little bit of foresight and say like, okay, so let's say I ignore this. What could happen? And am I going to end up back here anyway? Is it better to just go with this now or not? And either is fine. But I think just giving that little pause, I guess, whenever I
Mm.
notice myself pausing or asking for help, that's when I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm trusting myself here because I'm doing like, I don't know, due diligence or something to like make
Mm.
sure that I'm doing a good job before I make a decision. I'm act impulsively, I whatever. Um, which I realize sounds a little bit conflicting because earlier I was like, you don't need to ask advice, trust yourself. And now I'm like, it's really great that I ask for advice. But I guess it's an individual thing, right? Like that is part of self-trust for some people. And for other people, it's about learning to not have to. Because I used to be that way, which is like I never ask for help, never ask for advice. So part of learning to trust myself has been doing that. Whereas I think for a lot of people who maybe rely heavily on advice of other people, it's about learning to go the other way. So it's a bit of a
Mm.
balance, but yeah, it's a difficult question because it's something I guess that's situational and also something that doesn't naturally come across to be like, I'm going to pay attention to how I'm trusting myself at the moment, or it
Yeah.
it kind of just starts to happen really. Um,
I like
yeah,
that idea of due diligence with yourself though, because it's also
mm,
can be nice for some people to have almost have a bit of a structure or like a checklist of like,
yeah,
I'm going to collect some evidence. I'm going to see how I feel. I'm going to ask other people. Fundamentally, though, it is my decision. But let me maybe part of trusting the decision is knowing that I've gone through that due diligence. And then I
mhm,
think also a bit of a process of recognizing in yourself when it's time to stop. And I say
mhm,
that because I remember having a few years ago having like a conversation with my coach where I was trying to make a decision about something, and they were straight up just like, "You do know you've made the decision. What you're actually doing right now is asking for permission. You want me to like validate you've
yeah,
made the
yeah,
right
yeah.
one. There's nothing about this that is you trying to decide. Like just
Mhm.
trust it, go with it." So I think there's yeah, where do you draw the line so you're not going round and round in circles on it?
That's really good. And it's fascinating as well that in that situation, like you were asking for permission, and I feel like that's such a common thing is people know what they want or need to do, but it is asking for that permission or some validation or just someone to be like, sounds good, like just anything, just to like give the nudge to go that way. Do you feel like,
Yeah.
because obviously you said that was like in the past when you were working with a coach, do you feel that that still comes up for you in this in the same way now? Like when you're doing that, do you still look for kind of validation or permission from other people when you're making that? Or have you come
Not
kind of out the other
really.
side almost?
I feel like I'm
Yeah,
out the
love
other
that.
side. More than anything, if I'm discussing it with someone, I'll just be like, I don't know, I'll just be like, I know what I'm gonna do, so I don't really know why I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
But
I've
you know
heard
what
you
this
say that 100 times.
but you know what it leads me on to actually,
Mhm.
um, is the fact that like I think we need other people to build self-trust, because part of
Mm,
the reason why I'm able to do that is because other people have said to me, "You know you're just gonna do whatever you want anyway. So like
yeah.
we don't need to talk about this." So like you need that community or that reference point for other people to kind of show
Mm.
you what's possible, I suppose.
Definitely. It's really interesting because when you say about talking to other people, my head goes immediately to two places. One is coaching, and two is like loved ones, like friends and family, right? And I think there's almost two types of it because sometimes I think speaking to friends and family about it, depending obviously on who they are, can be what we were talking about earlier in people kind of taking that opportunity away from you, especially if you've got any like fixers or anything like that around you who will go, here's what you need to do. That kind of strips that opportunity from you. But obviously, if you work with people, friends or family or coaches or anything that can kind of, question and challenge and empower you in that way, it, yeah, I think it's a really, really vital part of that, actually, like you say, to kind of just for people sometimes just to point it out and be like, you're going to do it. Like, you make good decisions, or like whatever it is, having that. And I guess in the initial stages, it is looking for that validation still, isn't it? Of like,
Mm,
validate me, tell me that I'm okay, help me build my confidence, that kind of thing. Um,
yeah.
it's interesting as well talking about coaching and self-trust, because I think and again, just I don't want to spend the whole time just bringing everything back to like the neurodivergent lens, but I think you were saying about learning to trust yourself in like, um, I guess on your own and then with other people. If we look at something, with neurodivergence, like RSD or something like that, where we get these feelings come up, and then we're like, if we trust those feelings, that's very easy to like go into a big spiral. So it's
Mm.
also part of self-trust is learning to not trust some parts.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do unless you're like working with someone or speaking with someone who can help you through that.
Mm,
But that seems like another part of it is part of self-trust is learning to not trust some parts of yourself.
yeah.
And that was something I hadn't considered until you literally said that, and I was like, oh shit, like that's a big thing.
Right.
Um, yeah, I
And
wondered
that's
if you had
like,
any thoughts on that.
yeah, and I think, well, actually, that comes to a question I was going to ask you. I'll ask you in a sec about almost like what breaks self trust, because I think,
Mm,
or prevents it from being developed. Because honestly, primarily the main thing that I work on with people across all different areas of life, but tends to be career focused, is how could I possibly make a career decision or a change to my career when my feelings and thoughts about it are so different day to day. So on Monday, I wanted to
mm,
quit and I was ready to resign, and I don't even have another job yet. And on Wednesday, actually everything's okay. And so the emotional element of that's actually so important, because our emotions tell us about, quite often, about what it is that we want to happen or change. But if you
mm,
are tended towards emotional dysregulation, or feelings of changing an intensity of emotion, yeah, well, how do you figure out which ones you don't trust? And I
mm,
do have some thoughts on that, but maybe before that, we should explore a bit about like what else, what do you think it is that blocks self trust from being developed?
mm. It's a good question. I think we've touched on a couple of the points already, as far as like being told that we can't trust ourselves, not being given the opportunity to trust ourselves. But I think one of the things, I mean, the obvious answer that comes up for me is fear, right? It's like it would be really easy to trust yourself if there wasn't fear of negative outcomes, right? So I think fear is a massive part of that. And
Mm,
sometimes working through that fear of like, let's say you want to leave your job. If I leave my job, what happens? And if I don't leave my job, what happens? Which fear is scarier, basically? Or like,
mm,
which fear can I not handle as well? If you want to leave your job, and by leaving your job, maybe you're going to be a bit worried about money, but you think you'll find something, versus staying in your job and like, I don't know, every day's miserable, my boss bullies me, whatever it is. Okay, well, which one do you want? Like that can be a really good way. But I think fear is a massive blocker for self-trust, because it shouts way louder. Like
mm,
the feelings of self-trust are quite like calm and peaceful feelings of like acceptance and almost like giving into the trust. Whereas fear is like shouting and like quite like, I don't know, just violent and loud and stuff really. So I think it's a lot easier to
mm,
lean into the fear. So I think that would be like, if I was gonna try and not talk for the full hour on just this question, it would be, I think fear is like the biggest blocker probably. And then obviously those other things we mentioned. Um,
mm.
but yeah, what about you? What are there any kind of barriers to self-trust that you see or kind of want to add?
Definitely agree with you on the fear front, right? Because to that point of, you can't build trust unless you've given yourself the opportunity to. It's hard to give yourself the opportunity to if you're stuck in fear, that often can masquerade
Yes.
as excuse me, as like avoidance, or other things that it isn't clear that that's what the fear is. Definitely that. I think a big one for me is the insidiousness of, and from an, I guess, an ADHD perspective and undiagnosed ADHD perspective, it's the insidiousness of all of the things that you are struggling to get yourself to do, because it
Mm,
it it's a building block, I think, of how you see yourself. So as an example, if I think about like hobbies, right? It's such a common cliche, if you will, about people with ADHD that hobby jump and get obsessed with the novelty of something, and then they do it obsessively for a month and don't look at it again. And I think when you don't necessarily know what that is, or you're being told by other people that that makes you unreliable or inconsistent or lack of follow through, it adds to all of these building blocks about why you can't be trusted, because a trustworthy person would start a hobby, this is what we think anyway, would start a
Mm.
hobby that they would continue with. And I think what's actually really sad about that is that we get so attached to that as the definition and proof that we can't be trusted, when the majority of the time it is inconsequential. Like, actually, who
Mm.
cares if you play the piano for 2 months and then don't play again? Like, it's not, a lot of this stuff isn't actually important, but it's hard to see it like that when you're coming from a place of not feeling good enough.
Yeah.
So I think it's just these like small things that build this picture that you couldn't possibly be trusted.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, I think, in that hobby example is like sometimes what gets in the way of trust is again the fear, but a fear of failure specifically, right? So like if you know pick up piano and you only play it for 2 months, well, I've failed and whatever because I only did it for 2 months. But obviously, a simple reframe to that is be like, well done, you played piano for 2 months, that's great.
Mm,
But I think a lot of people, there's almost like this um you know, like the idea of like sunken cost and things like that. Like if you put this time, this money, this effort, this whatever into it, and then you stop it, it's a failure. But like for me, the reframe there is like, okay, so let's imagine you get into a relationship, right? And you get into a relationship and you're in that relationship for 5 years, and then you realize it's not the right relationship. You're then met with a choice then of going, okay, do I sunken cost put everything into this and hope for the best? Or do I cut my losses, say, hey, we had a 5 year relationship, what an amazing thing, but it's not working for us, for me, for whatever. Let me leave this and find something else. And I think obviously that's like kind of like a longer term or maybe higher stakes thing than the hobbies. But it comes back to that idea then of trust of like following your gut. Like if you know in your gut this relationship, this hobby, this job, this whatever isn't right, it's almost your responsibility at that point to do something with that. And then that's where the self trust comes in, because if you trust yourself, that decision becomes a little bit easier. But if you don't trust yourself, that's when you then rely on other people who then don't know you as well, and it becomes a bit of a cycle. And I think this is what's so difficult about self trust is it is so cyclical. It
mm.
takes quite a lot to break out, but once you've broken out of it, it does just get way easier. But even recognizing you need to get out of it sometimes is really difficult if you've never been given the opportunity and equipped and stuff like we've said already. It's funny how we've been speaking for 30 minutes and everything links together, isn't it? But
It's
it's
all
yeah, I
connected.
think it is all
Oh,
linked.
I
Um,
have a, I have like, I want to like jump up and down. I have such a thing about this, right? Which to your point of like, ending is not the same as failure, and
mm,
we get stuck on this idea that because something changes or something finishes,
yeah.
it must have been the wrong thing. And I think part of being able to trust yourself is redefining what success, or what it, you know, what that ultimately success is, because you otherwise end up trapped fundamentally in never being able to win unless you, I don't know, make a choice or a decision that you do forever and the rest of your life and it never ends. um
Mm.
and I think there was something else I was going to say and it's fallen out of my brain. Oh, I was on one, can't remember, but yeah, it's just that element of like, does it, change and failure is not the same as, nope, change and ending is not the same as failure. Oh, here it is. It is that making, like, if you make a decision, and this is why I think it's helpful to find ways to feel like you're really okay with the decisions that you make. If it was the
Mm.
right decision for you at the time and then it becomes the wrong decision, it was still the right decision because when you made it, it was right.
Yeah.
And there are so many things out of your control that you couldn't have known. So
Mm.
there you go.
I think a lot of the time with that kind of like something changing or ending isn't a failure. It's funny that the idea of, well, in this example, the idea of success is I'm going to take up piano today and I'm going to play it every day until the day I die, right? and I don't know if I'm going too like nebulous about this, but when you die, that's still an ending. So if we're really taking that as the example, you're failing by dying, but you don't know about it because you're dead. And it's like, I know that's such like a silly thing, but if we do take it to that extreme, it's like, well, okay, well, everything is going to end. Like I've heard something, and I don't know where it's from, and I'm probably going to butcher it. Something about with, especially with ADHD, there is a 100% failure rate on everything that you do, and that seems really scary. And when I say it to clients, they look at me like they want to stop working with me forever and they hate me. But it isn't the idea that you will fail at everything you ever do. But there will be times where everything you set out to do, it will go wrong or something will happen, or if you say I'm going to, do yoga every day and you skip a day, that's what it means. So technically, if you set yourself up to do it every day and you skip a day, you failed. But it's then about realizing, hey, it was going to fail. I'll just get back on it the next day. And it's
Yeah.
kind of building a bit of that resilience to be like, part of that trust is knowing, almost trusting yourself to fuck up or to fail, but knowing you'll get up again on the other side. I think that's a really big part of it as well. And there was something else I was going to say, and it's gone because that's what keeps happening because we get all
It'll,
excited about this, and
it'll come
then there's
around.
too many thoughts. Um, but yeah, I think that like almost part of self trust for me is knowing that I'm going to fuck up and being okay with it, and knowing that it will be okay.
Yeah.
And I guess more so than knowing it will be okay, knowing I will be okay, if we're bringing it back to, like, the self-trust is like, "I'll be fine." Like, it's cool, it's fine, it's okay. And I think
Yeah.
that takes a lot of work as well, because obviously there's quite often a lot of things that are telling us it won't be okay, specifically if we've got anxiety, RSD, all of these things kind of buzzing around. They're very
Hmm.
loud to be like, uh, "It's not gonna be okay, you're not gonna be okay," but just being able to like recognize that almost. I mean, we were speaking this morning and I was saying about anxiety, and I saw the TikTok video of someone being like, "Oh my God, I'm so panicky, I'm anxious and whatever." And then just being like, okay, and just noticing that and letting it go. That kind of comes in here as well with the trusting, I think. Sorry, I
Well, it's
feel like I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
no, no, no. Well, it's all acceptance, isn't it? And I think maybe that's also a precursor or like a good starting step if somebody was like, where do I even begin on this journey? Is like you can't trust yourself if you're not willing to accept the reality of what makes you you. Um,
Mm,
in both the strengths and also maybe limitations. And like as an example, I was talking to a client about this yesterday actually, because we were discussing self-denial as a bit of a like protective mechanism. And so like
mm,
I have an issue with binge watching TV, and I used to go, yeah, I'll just watch one episode, and then it'd turn into two. I'll just watch two. And I'm constantly in denial and telling myself, I'll just formulate the willpower. Um,
mm,
depending on the show, not all of them, but when you get locked in and you're like, ugh. And I think like that was a huge breach of self-trust for me, because I'm like, I cannot trust myself to stop watching this show.
mm,
But that massively transformed when I just accepted that if I'm going to start watching this, I'm going to be watching it for the rest of the day. That is the reality of the
mm,
situation. And so let's stop trying to exercise self trust when it will not work. And you already know that it won't work.
mm.
Just make a choice. Are you willing to write off the day? And if you're not, don't start. And it just puts you, I think, in a bit more of a constructive, like problem solving mode when you realize that
Mm.
actually there are some things that you will do that you wish that you wish that you didn't, but that's just the reality.
Yeah. And that for me ties into the whole idea of like the circle of influence and stuff, right? Is in that situation, you can't necessarily control what happens once you've started, but you can control whether you start. And like that seems to be a really good thing of like trusting yourself to know at which point you can execute control, and
Mm.
then what point you can't. And trusting yourself and knowing yourself enough to be like, this is like a thing I can't really get on top of. If I start, I'm not going to stop, but being okay with that in some situations. And if you're not, you're not. And it's actually kind of a similar thing to me, I guess, in like when I have like a day off, for example, and I'm like, I can either feel guilty all day and like think, oh, I'm going to start work and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and probably spend my day doom scrolling or something. Or I can say, I'm actually committing to a full day off here. I'm going to trust myself that I'm going to stick to this day off, but I'm also going to trust that things are going to be okay. And when I come back on Monday or whatever, things I'll just pick up where I left off. And at that point, then you unlock the freedom to not sit in kind of that like task paralysis, decision paralysis, and just be like, great, it's a day off. I'm gonna go to the beach. I'm gonna sit and watch TV all day. it doesn't matter, but I'm committed to doing that. And that kind of unlocks that freedom a little bit to commit to whatever you're doing
Mm.
in the ways that you want to commit to, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
I have
So
I have more to say on that, but I just wanted to say Georgia in the
please.
comments has mentioned the sunken cost thing. Yeah, getting me every time. Like, I think being able to redirect the thought or reframe it as like what you will gain from something, because
Hmm.
the automatic reflex is like, what am I going to lose, right? By
Yeah.
like stopping this now. And yeah, like in the idea of the 100% fail rate makes everything feel lighter. It's kind of, it's just freeing because I guess it links to the denial. Like if you're in denial about it,
Right.
it's like you're constantly coming up against a problem that you've already had and assuming something's going to change and it just doesn't.
No. And also, you're going to be spending so much energy trying to not accept something that is just a fact. Like it's going to happen, you know. It's like trying to, I know it's such a cliche thing, but like if you were to say like, no, if I think about it enough and analyze it enough, the sun's not going to set tonight. Oh, well, guess what? You know, like it just is going to. And like if you just go, the sun's going to set. So let's say I've got, I don't know, 8 hours. I'm going to make the most of this time, or I'm just going to kind of sit and deny the fact the sun's going to set and I've wasted then that time. Like it comes back to that idea of like self-trust is so intrinsically linked with trust as a whole. You've almost got to trust yourself to trust the information you have. And like it's a
Mm,
whole muddled, linked up thing.
meta
But
universe. But I
yes,
think
it is.
related related to that is like, especially for neurodivergent folks, is a lot of the advice that we've been given, productivity advice, life advice, has not been made for our brains. And so it doesn't make sense why it's not working. And I think motivation is like such a crucial one for that. And I think about this a lot with coaching, right? Which is like, if you're working with a coach that doesn't know about or understand ADHD, like I remember during my coach training, one of the things that we'll discuss is like, is the client motivated towards their goal? And if they're
Mhm,
not working towards it, what are the barriers to that? And quite often there's this narrative that it must mean that like they don't want it enough, or it's like out of alignment with their true desire. And that is true in a lot of the time, you know, a lot of the cases. But with if you don't understand the context of ADHD, you're missing an entire piece of that, which is maybe they do really want it, but there are executive function reasons why
mhm.
it's difficult, or you know, there's no deadline, there's no urgency, like there's so many other factors. And so I think my point was just that building part of building self-trust is knowing, working with, being in rooms or virtual rooms with other people that understand some quite specific nuances. And I found that an
Mm,
interesting thing about like, you know, joining your big spoon community, right? Where we're all together in the
mm,
mornings doing like body doubling. A lot of people, I think we have an advantage in that we spend a lot of time with people and people full stop. No, we spend a lot of time with people and understand like their inner worlds and what's going on for them, which is extremely
mhm.
validating. But a lot of people don't have that. And so like in Big Spoon as an example, I think it helps people to build trust in themselves, to be with other people that also are working in an unconventional or like unexpected way.
Yeah, it's really funny. Just before you mentioned Big Spoon, I was going to mention the idea of community, and I know George is going to be sat there cheering at the screen at it. But I think the idea of community and building self-trust is either surrounding yourself with people who work in a similar way to you, you know, right? Like people that you have similarities with. Maybe they're neurodivergent as well. Maybe you know you've got the same whatever shared characteristic, and then being able to bounce your ideas, your trust, your things off of them, but also building this idea of a community of people who kind of just get it, whether that's a coach, whether that's Big Spoon, whether that's, you know, whatever it is, having a group of people who kind of get it, it starts to remove some of those barriers of, in, you know, we both had the same coach training, I imagine, which is that idea of like how motivated are they towards their goals. But if you then work in things for a neurodivergent lens, that suddenly is stripped away. And if that's the first time that that has been stripped away for somebody, that's going to suddenly open the doors to that opportunity of like, oh, shit, I can trust myself. Like, I do want this. I don't feel
Mm,
motivated at the moment, but because of XYZ, whatever that may be, but I do know that I still want it. And sometimes that's enough. You don't then need to take the next step to actually do the thing, but trusting that that is what you want, despite being told by kind of like a lot of neurotypical advice that you must not want it because you're not doing it or whatever, that then
yeah,
can unlock the door. So sometimes it's being given that like key or that piece of information to just go like, no, no, you're fine. Like you still want this. That's still okay. And it's sometimes not even about that like permission or that validation we were looking at earlier. But it's just sometimes just someone being like, I get it. Like just understanding. And that can
yeah.
sometimes be a massive thing to like unlocking the self-trust. And I think I realized I was speaking quite like theoretically then, but as I was speaking about it, I was like, oh shit, I think this is actually quite personal for me. Like I think that's what gave me the ability or the opportunity to trust myself was having people around me that just went, "It's okay, like you've got it." Just
Mm,
that. Like I didn't need them to give me advice or permission but just to be like, "You go." Like I believe in you, like just having that belief or that like encouragement. That for me was what unlocked the self-trust because I think I already had it, but I was too scared to like do anything about it. So then just having those people be like, "Go for it." That was like massive.
yeah. I remember you doing that for me not so long ago, actually, maybe like 3 months ago, when
Mhm.
because I would say like I generally do trust myself, which is an incredible thing that I now get to say. But like,
Mhm.
there's always days or struggles, especially if I'm having a bad brain day and I'm so frustrated that I'm not doing, I had a list and the list is not listing. And I
Mhm.
remember you saying, I was talking to you about it and you saying, like, you do know you'll just do it though. Like, and like observing the fact that I tend to be someone that marinates quite a lot on stuff and then one day it
Mm.
will just happen. And so
Mhm.
trusting that if I'm not doing it in this moment for whatever reason, that's fine. You'll come back around and it'll get there. So I think, yeah,
Mm.
and I think especially because a lot of people as well, and I would give this advice um at any stage of your self-trust journey, if you will, is having somebody to reflect it back to you or having a record for yourself of the things that you
Mhm.
have done, because it's so easy to forget.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, the default is, I can't remember what happened last week, so I must have been doing nothing. And therefore, like, I've not been productive enough, I've not been good enough.
Mm.
And especially if you're then getting like emotionally carried away, and I mean carried away as in like you feel like you've been carried away by an emotion, that makes it even harder when you're blinkered in, say, panic or fear or
Mhm.
shame, to have something that can pull you out and be like, let's look at the evidence of this, look at everything that you have achieved, you're on track.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's interesting. I remember that conversation we had about like, but you just will get it done like that. But talking about that idea of like, let's say a to-do list, and you were like, oh, I had a to-do list and it's not been done and I failed and things like that. First of all, the coach and the nice person in me is like, obviously not doing your to-do list isn't a failure. However, if we're going to call it a failure for this example, we then come back to that idea of the 100% fail rate and be like, well, yeah, it was bound to happen. You were bound to have a day where you don't do your to-do list. Just start it again tomorrow or the next
Mm,
day or next week. Like you will get it done. Whatever, even if you have to move things around and, maybe you have to send emails to people to say this is going to be late or whatever, but it will be done and you know the things you need to do to get it done. And I think having that trust in yourself, and I'm saying you here, I do mean you, but I also mean everybody.
everybody.
Just having that trust to be like it will just get done. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes that, and it's almost quite a cliche at this point of that thing of like everything you've ever been through, you've been through it, which means you've come out the other side of it. Um,
Yeah.
that's really good for self-trust to be like, but you've never not made it work because you're here now and you're doing okay. Or maybe you're not doing okay, but you're still doing, And I think
Yeah.
that it's quite a simple idea really, but I think that's really easy to get lost when you're kind of in that mode of like, I can't trust myself, everything's gone wrong, I'm failing, I'm doing this, I'm doing it's really easy to forget like, hey, I'm here though. Like I'm able to be having these worries because I've made it through everything else before. Like it's
Right.
quite again, that goes quite like nebulous there, but it helps me at least to remember that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, because
yeah,
we'll all have examples of stuff that we've overcome that we didn't think that we would. But the more time
yeah,
passes, the more it just fades into the background like it wasn't a big
mhm,
deal. But actually,
yeah,
maybe there's something there in being intentional about listing or thinking about or revisiting, like, what is it that I've done that I'm proud of, or what am I doing now that I never thought was possible? Because we always
mhm,
like upgrade to the next thing that we want and forget that actually that's quite like where everyone is right now. There'll have been things that have happened that were actually quite a big deal. So let's kind of
mm,
take stock of that.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this keeps happening. I keep thinking of really good points and then forgetting them. Um, there was something from
Yeah.
earlier that just came back to me, and now I don't know what it was. It will come back at some point. It was something to do with other people, and I can't remember what it was, but it will come back anyway. Um, in like the coach world, I guess, or in like your coaching brain, do you have any like go-to questions you ask people when they're like struggling with self-trust or anything like that? Like, or any go to anything. It doesn't have to be questions you ask, but just is there anything that if someone says to you like, oh, I just don't trust this, or you notice it, is there anything that pops up for you where you're like, aha, this would be helpful here?
I think part of what I do now that I never used to do is some like overt validation. So like when I
Mm,
was first trained in coaching, right? The whole point is that like you are helping the client to self-validate and to
mhm,
understand and trust themselves, and that's like the power of coaching. But I think that through experience of the kinds of people that I work with, I realize that a lot of people are early on in that journey and they do
mm,
sometimes need some like actual validation that their struggle or their and it's not me saying like yes that is right or that is wrong, but more just like acknowledgement of why it's difficult, and that there is something,
mm,
rather than just nodding and be like, what do you think that you should do? Because quite often that sends people into a spin because they're then like, I don't know, is this right, like what does she think? So
mm,
yeah, my first thought was around that kind of validation aspect, and I think part of what I see my role as in coaching with people is being almost like a steady calm amongst the changing seas of
mm,
what is happening, right? So if I have a coaching client one week that's like, I think I'm trying to make the decision that I want to start this new project, and then they come to me the next week and they don't want to do it anymore, or like something's changed. I think that there's a lot of people that maybe that don't understand that would be a bit like, why have they changed their mind, or like why I need to sort of pull them up on it, or I need to keep them accountable. And
mm,
I think part of helping people develop self trust is almost being alongside them as they go
mhm.
around all of these places, and then helping find those threads that can help them
Yeah.
figure out this is actually at the core of what you're telling me, um,
Mm.
and kind of give that back to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also really glad you said that because that did remind me of my other thing as well, because you were talking there about other people. I think that some of the things that hold people back from self-trust is worrying what other people are going to think if they
Yeah.
change their mind or if they stop doing something or any of that, right? And it can be really difficult, especially, I mean, it could be anyone, but I think especially the people around us that are closest to us, sometimes that can be the people that it's hardest to kind of you worry about their opinions more for a lot of people. Like a lot of clients that I speak to, they will want to make a decision and I'll be like, oh, but I told my partner X, Y, Z, and now I want, and that's like a big barrier for them, right? And that's almost a separate point to self trust, I guess, because they're already at the point they're trusting themselves. Now they just need to actually make the decision and do it. And
Hmm.
that really puts the self-trust to the test then. And that's when obviously things like coaching and stuff are so um beneficial, is because they've then got someone that they can kind of like have through that process. But yeah, I think kind of being able to trust yourself in the face of worrying what other people think, and maybe the people that you're worried about, they don't trust you or they've shown you can't be trusted in some, for a lot of people that will be parents and things like that. That can be
Hmm.
really really difficult. um and for that, obviously, that's a separate thing and a lot of coaching work and things like that. But then there's also the idea of like worrying what other people think. Again, I hear a lot of clients say things about like LinkedIn and social media in general. Most of the people on social media are complete strangers, right? And most people don't care about you. They don't give a shit what you do. They don't care if you go back on a decision, whatever. And the reason I say this is I had this really, really recently because I did before Big Spoon, I did that like reply to your private social messages thing. And a few people came in the first week and then it slowly dropped off and slowly dropped off. And then my initial thought was like, oh, I failed. Like, no one wants to come to this, whatever. And I had to trust myself to be like, okay, well, you tried it. It was okay. You don't need to worry about other people thinking you're a failure because it doesn't matter what other people think. And also, they're probably not thinking about you. Like, if we look at the spotlight theory, no one's being like, Ed's meant to be doing his thing right now. I bet it's failed. Like, that's just not happening. So that, like, as a personal thing, is like looking at, yeah, the opinion of other people and trying to remove some of that weight that it carries, which again
Mm.
is another big thing. And if anyone wants to do that, we're both coaches. Hey, but that is like such a massive thing, you know? Um, I think that was my whole point from earlier. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah.
Well, and that ties back nicely to something that I was hoping once I said that sentence, it would remind me because it slipped out of my head. But I feel like it ties back nicely to something we were talking about earlier. What was it? What were you just saying? Ah,
About other people,
other
about fear of
people. Oh,
judgment.
fear of judgment. Yes. Part of thanks. Part of self-trust is knowing what to doubt yourself about and what to not trust yourself on. And
Mm,
like I say this to my clients quite a lot, and something that I do all of the time now is I just flat outright doubt my perception of what other people think of me because it's
mm,
usually well, not usually wrong, but I guess if I think, oh gosh, I don't know if that person liked me, or did was I too much for that person, or all of the rejection sensitivity, like hyper awareness.
mm,
There's been so many examples where I've seen it play out and realized that my perception of the situation was so wrong that I'm
mm.
like, as soon as we get that thought, we're just going to doubt it and don't trust it. Because we don't know, like fundamentally.
No, absolutely not. That's really, really good because I mean, I know part of the work with like reframing and stuff is like we're predisposed to kind of think that people are thinking bad things about us. And I guess this is kind of coming a little bit away of self trust, but I'll bring it back hopefully. Is looking at we're predisposed to think this person thinks negatively of me, but that is if we're like Schrodinger's cat, like it could be true or not true. It's
Yeah.
just as likely true or not true that they're thinking you're the best person in the world. But we don't default to that. But you can train your brain to default to that. And maybe you
Hmm.
don't want to go as far as like they think you're the best person in the world. But maybe we can aim for like neutrality. Like maybe they think you're fine. Like that could be a neutral place to aim for. But in doing that, that then kind of like strips some of the power away from other people. But back to what you said about kind of being able to doubt yourself, intentionally doubt yourself, that really helps with that then. Because if you're like having all of these horrible negative thoughts about this person thinks I'm too much, da, 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 you can either choose to doubt those or you can choose to go, well, they're probably not thinking that. But by doing the reframe that says they're probably thinking you're fine, you're training yourself to doubt the thoughts that are inherently negative in the first place. So it kind
Mm.
of all links round. So yeah, I really, really like that point, and it helps take the power away from other people, which then
Mm.
starts to release you from some of the fear of judgment, and then starts to release some of that fear. And then it comes back to you giving yourself the opportunity to just try it and hope for the best and see what happens.
Yeah.
And it all links together.
It all links together.
It all links
I'm
together.
laughing
Um,
because when we started, we were like, we've booked it for an hour, but like if after half an hour we feel like we're ready to
I
wind
was
down,
just
it's
thinking
fine. Of
that.
course we were going to talk for the whole
Of
time.
course we were. And in fact, I think we're actually going to have to rein ourselves in so as to not go over.
No.
Which actually leads me to my question was, is there any like final points on self-trust that you think it's like important to talk about that we haven't yet?
No, but I want to leave you with a little metaphor that I think I might have
Please.
half written into a Substack article that I was thinking about the other day, right? I feel
We're getting
like
little
this is a bit of
spoilers.
a this is a bit of a representation of building self-trust. I was walking to the train station last week and I was wearing a skirt that I don't normally wear. That's like a light knitted material, and so I couldn't feel it on my legs. And so the whole journey, especially because I had a backpack on, I was feeling really self-conscious that like it had ridden up and like my ass was on show. And so I was constantly checking that it was still there. And so I didn't
Mm.
enjoy my walk because I was constantly like, is my skirt still on? Is my skirt still on? And I had this little thought journey that was like, I feel like this is part of what trusting yourself is, which is you kind of just have to go, I've checked this enough to know that the skirt is there. So now I'm going to just like release myself, focus on something else, trust that the skirt will stay in place. And if the worst that happens is that my ass does go on show, like it's not the end of the world. But unless you give yourself the opportunity to just let it sit where it is, you're always like in stress of like, I
Mhm.
just need to check that I've done this right, or I just need to check that I'm doing what I should be doing. And you can't just like breathe and enjoy the journey. So that's my little closing
Mm.
statement.
I love that. And if we're linking that back as well, if you couldn't feel your skirt and it rode up and your ass was on show, but you didn't know it, that's the exact same thing as not knowing what other people are thinking about you. Because people could be looking at your bare ass on the way to the train station and being like, oh my God, she's got her ass out. But also, no one could be seeing it or no one could be thinking anything, even if they do see it. And that's the same thing as like,
There you go.
people think that I'm too much. Well, you don't know that. And it's having that trust to be like, well, A, they may not, and B, even if they do, it doesn't matter. If I don't know about it, it doesn't matter. Like,
Yep.
and that's a perfect metaphor to end on. I'm not even going to say anything after this because that is a really good thing to end on.
Well, and also one
But
last thing though, as an
yeah,
additional set of people that might be seeing your bare ass, which is people going, "Oh, thank God it's not just me." That's also happened to me, and I also feel like that.
yeah,
So
absolutely. That's very, very true. Yeah, love that. So what are we doing? To summarize, is self-trust possible? Yes. Just get your ass out on the way to the train station. Is that this whole hour has been
perfect,
summarized in that. Love that.
perfect.
I'm
That's
happy
exactly
with
what it
that being
is.
the main takeaway. Um, Before we go, what have you got to promo at the moment?
Promo. Well, very nicely related to the topic of fear, kind of holding us back.
Mhm.
I have launched a group program which is starting mid-May, 21st of May. I know the exact date because I've written it so many times now. That's about creating without fear. So that is a small group, about 8 of us, meeting every week for 6 weeks to Coddywomple, which is the concept of moving with purpose towards a destination that is not yet known. So the whole idea is about
Mm.
having something that creatively you want to do or put out there doesn't need to be kind of prescriptive, um, but having a supportive group of people together that get it, that can kind of move through those icky feelings of fear and perfectionism and worry and just enjoy the process and lead with joy and see where you land. So there's details about that on my profile. I'll put a link in the comments section to this as well.
Amazing. Fantastic. Love that. It sounds super, super exciting. I've seen behind the scenes of it and it looks really, really good.
Yeah.
So yes, I would definitely recommend
What
people go to
about
that.
what about you, Ed? Promo some stuff.
Same old, same old. I'm doing my one-to-one coaching. I am still available for life, career, ADHD coaching and stuff. I'm moving much more into sex and relationship coaching at the moment. So I'm starting to work with a lot more people in that space with a neurodivergent lens. So if anyone has any kind of sex and relationship coaching needs, then that is that. I also have the Big Spoon community, which obviously you are a part of as well, Rach. And that is basically daily body doubling every weekday, 9 till 10. And there's a group of us that kind of get together, work together, and just it's a nice little community. So that's really nice as well. And those are the main things. I've got no big projects or anything on the go at the moment, just one-to-one and Big Spoon. So yeah, that is everything. We have
Beautiful.
managed to do this with what 42 seconds to spare. This is
Bang on.
professional timing. Um, I mean, all I need to say really is thank you to everyone that has watched and left comments and things like that. And if anyone's watching this on like a recording or anything after the fact, thank you for watching it as well. I've really enjoyed our chat. It's been really, really fun
I could do it all day, every day. Watch
all
me
day, every day. We
forever.
do it all day, every day, just not on live. But yeah, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, all good. Lovely. I'm gonna
Incredible.
have my lunch.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to end the stream now. See you later.
Bye.